It started with a Wi-Fi name. Not just any Wi-Fi name, but one that made my blood run cold the second it popped up on my phone while I was sipping lemonade on my port. There it was, plain as day on my network scan, KarenNet_ext. That might seem harmless, until you realize my shed is locked, I live alone, and the signal was stronger the closer I walked toward my own backyard. And when I opened the shed door, there it was. A cheap gray extender screwed into the wall, wires tucked behind my tool rack like a sneaky parasite. That was the moment I realized Karen from the HOA didn't just cross the line, she danced over it with jazz hands and a screwdriver. And that's when the revenge plan began to buzz in my brain, literally. My name is Mason, and I live in a peaceful little suburban community, or at least it used to be, before Karen got elected as HOA president. If you've ever had the misfortune of dealing with a power-hungry busybody in cargo capris and a whistle around her neck, then you understand. Karen had rules about mailbox height, grass length, curtain color, even bird feeders. And she enforced them like she was training for a boot camp run by Satan himself. But despite all that, I kept to myself. I paid my dues, kept my yard neat, and said "good morning" with the same gritted teeth every time I passed her. What I didn't do was invite her into my property or share my internet, and yet, here we were. The shed was my sanctuary. I'd built it myself from scratch with treated lumber, solar panels, insulation, and a lock I installed with a triple reinforced bolt system. I stored tools, electronics, and occasionally ran my laptop there when I needed peace and quiet. I knew every inch of that place. So when I found the Wi-Fi extender, still warm, still blinking, I nearly blacked out from rage. I unscrewed it and saw the plug-in power adapter. Not mine. There were even fresh boot prints on the floor, light tread, definitely not my size. I felt like I had been violated in the weirdest, techiest way possible. But I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to plan. First, I checked the footage. I had a single security camera aimed near the back of my house. Not great angle coverage on the shed door, but enough to see who had been around. Rewinding to 2 days ago, there she was. Karen in her peach windbreaker, clipboard under her arm, walking around like she owned the block. She waited until the fence contractor I'd hired left, then casually pushed through my side gate like it was hers. I watched her glance around, then open my shed, step in, and close it behind her. 5 minutes later she reappeared, adjusting her purse and looking smug as a cat. That same night, I started seeing the signal on my phone. I marched straight to her door. It was 8:13 p.m. Early enough that she'd still be up planning neighborhood tyranny. When she opened the door, she gave me the fakest smile you've ever seen. The kind of smile people wear when they're trying to hide that they're slowly stealing your soul with HOA fines and passive-aggressive emails. I told her plainly what I'd found. The signal. The extender. The camera footage. Her reaction? Absolutely priceless. "Why would I need your Wi-Fi?" she said with a laugh that made my skin crawl. "My internet is just fine. Maybe your router's going crazy. It happens with older models, you know." "I have a new router," I replied. "And I saw you on video going into my shed." "Well, maybe I thought you left a sprinkler on," she said, crossing her arms. "It's not like you have anything worth stealing in there." I stared at her for a solid 5 seconds. "Except, apparently, my bandwidth." Her face twitched. That little tick people get when they realize they've been caught and can't quite figure out how to spin it fast enough. But instead of admitting fault or apologizing, she doubled down. "You know, as the HOA president, I technically have access to all communal areas, and that includes shared sheds. My shed is not communal." "Well, maybe it should be." And with that, she shut the door in my face. I stood there in stunned silence, the rage inside me going from boiling to electric. Karen didn't just cross the line. She built a toll booth on it and was charging me to walk across. I went back to the shed and looked at it differently now. It wasn't just wood and tools and Wi-Fi anymore. It was a war zone. She wanted free internet, she was going to get a whole experience. And so, I sat down, pulled out a notebook, and began drafting my plan. The next morning, I paid a visit to my neighbor, Tyler. A good friend, tech-savvy, and previously a telecom technician for a major ISP. He had all the gear to scan signals and locate devices. I told him the story, and he laughed so hard his coffee came out of his nose. You mean she installed an extender inside your shed without permission? That's felony-level stupidity. She thinks she's entitled to everything around here. She's about to get educated. Tyler walked over with his gear, did a full scan, and found not one but 3 extenders on his device. KarenNet_EXT, Karen Home 5G, and KarenNet_Public. All broadcasting out of 3 different locations. One from my shed. One, oddly enough, from the HOA utility closet near the tennis court. And one from a birdhouse on her own property. Is that even legal? I asked. Oh, it's not just illegal, Tyler grinned. It's poetic. That evening, as I stood inside my shed again, looking at the space she violated, I didn't just feel violated. I felt challenged. She thought she could use my space, steal my service, and lie to my face about it. That's when my eyes wandered to the top shelf near the window, where I had stored an old, sealed container from my gardening days. An empty wasp habitat I once used for pest relocation. And right then everything clicked. If she wanted to make my shed her signal station, I'd make sure it came with natural security. Something that buzzed, stung, and didn't take kindly to intruders. I didn't know yet how far this would go. But I knew this, she poked the wrong shed. And nature was about to make her regret it. The next morning felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, like the calm before a summer storm, and I knew that Karen had no idea what was brewing. My shed still sat in the corner of the yard like nothing had happened, just a little wooden structure quietly plotting revenge on its new uninvited tenant. I had already removed the Wi-Fi extender and placed it neatly on my workbench, staring at it like it was some sort of alien artifact. It wasn't high-tech, just a mid-range signal booster with a power plug and a default SSID, but the fact that it had been installed in my shed without permission made it feel radioactive. I wasn't going to toss it yet. It would serve as bait for what was to come. But first, I needed to confirm the full extent of her signal siphoning operation, because if Karen was doing this to me, chances were I wasn't her only target. I gave Tyler a call and asked if he could run a broader sweep around the neighborhood, not just for signals but for physical signs of tampering or unauthorized installations. Tyler, ever the enthusiast when it came to catching tech crooks, was more than happy to oblige. He showed up within an hour with a backpack full of gadgets and a look in his eyes that made him seem like a kid on Christmas morning. We started at my house, scanned again, then made our way down the street. Every few houses, we'd pick up a familiar pattern, Wi-Fi names with eerily similar naming conventions. Karen Guest_EXT, HOA Admin_EXT, Karen Office_EXT. And each time the signal strength spiked, it was near odd places. A decorative birdhouse. A hollowed-out garden gnome. Even one hidden inside a fake rock near the community mailbox. She wasn't just tapping into one home, she was building a rogue mesh network using devices she didn't own and spaces that weren't hers. We mapped the whole thing and ended up back at Tyler's garage, where he plugged in his laptop and brought up the data. The web of signals formed a loose triangle with her house at the center. It wasn't just sneaky. It was strategic. She had positioned each extender in a way that gave her coverage across the park, the tennis courts, and at least 5 private residences. All boosting her personal signal, all drawing from different routers that likely belonged to people who never noticed their speeds slowing down or extra devices appearing on their networks. I was stunned and honestly a little impressed by the audacity. Tyler was grinning ear to ear. This is beyond HOA nonsense. She's practically running a black market ASP using other people's bandwidth. Can we prove she installed these? I asked. Yup, Tyler replied. Signal logs, timestamps, MAC addresses, all traceable. And if she ever logged into one of them from her phone or laptop, we'll have her fingerprint. We compiled a report and started reaching out quietly to some of the neighbors. I wasn't trying to go full whistleblower yet, but I wanted to gauge how far Karen had reached. The reactions were mixed. Some people were shocked. Others shrugged it off as harmless freeloading. But one neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, was furious. She was a retired nurse who relied on her network for remote medical consultations and had been complaining to her ISP for weeks about sudden bandwidth drop. When we showed her the data, she said, "She's messing with my work. I'm going to throw a brick through that woman's window." "Let's keep the bricks as a last resort," I joked, but I appreciated her spirit. That night, I debated what to do with the evidence. Part of me wanted to blow it up at the next HOA meeting. Publicly shame her. The other part of me knew that HOA meetings often went nowhere. People grumbled, minutes got recorded, and then Karen smiled through her teeth and moved on like nothing happened. I wanted something with real sting. Something that didn't just stop her but made her think twice before ever crossing into someone else's territory again. And then, as if on cue, I heard buzzing. The next morning I reached out to my old friend Mark, who happened to be a beekeeper. Not your average backyard hobbyist. Mark was a full-blown nature nerd who handled everything from bee colonies to wasp relocations for local farmers. When I told him I was interested in hosting a small wasp nest near my property, he raised an eyebrow. "Most people call me to get rid of them, not invite them in." "I need them for passive security," I said. Mark laughed. "That sounds shady as hell. You're not weaponizing nature, are you?" "No," I replied. "I'm just letting nature do its job where the law won't." After I explained the situation, he reluctantly agreed to help, under the condition that the nest be handled humanely and contained in a controlled structure. I assured him I'd prep the shed properly. Over the next 2 days, I sealed off all interior valuables, created a safe ventilation panel, and made sure the nest would be isolated from the rest of the yard. I didn't want anyone innocent getting hurt, just one very specific person with a history of entitlement and boundary violations. When the time came, Mark arrived with a small container holding a wasp colony ready for relocation. He gently transferred them into a partitioned enclosure mounted against the inside wall of the shed. There was a clear warning sign taped to the door, visible but easily removable. And the Wi-Fi extender? I screwed it right back onto the wall, exactly where Karen had installed it. The bait was set. The trap was buzzing. And now we waited. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, my exterior camera picked up movement. A familiar silhouette appeared near the gate. It was Karen, wearing what looked like a hoodie and gloves, as if she thought she was starring in some kind of suburban spy movie. She tiptoed to the shed, glanced around, and pried open the door. I could barely see her face on the night cam, but the moment she stepped inside, I heard it through the audio mic. A loud shriek, then several louder shrieks, then a symphony of slapping, stumbling, and pure chaos as she ran screaming into the night, clutching her arm and flailing like she was being chased by demons. Which, in a way, she was. Winged, buzzing demons that had no interest in HOA bylaws. The next morning, there were yellow jackets circling the shed like sentries. I checked the footage again, made backups, and smiled for the first time in weeks. Karen had gotten a very personal message from Mother Nature. And something told me she wouldn't be installing extenders on other people's property again anytime soon. The following morning, I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the neighborhood unfold like a slow-motion sitcom from my porch. Birds chirped, sprinklers hissed to life, and across the street, Karen's blinds were drawn shut for the first time in months. Usually by now she was out front with her clipboard, patrolling like a mall cop with too much caffeine, but today there was no sign of her. I already knew why. The previous night's chaos was still fresh in my mind, the way she bolted from the shed like a firecracker, arms flailing, shrieking at the top of her lungs, the camera capturing every second of her panic. It was one of those rare moments where karma didn't just work. It showed up early, clocked in, and went overtime. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to make sure she wouldn't spin the story in her favor. Because if there was one thing Karen was good at, it was flipping the narrative and painting herself as the victim. Sure enough, by noon I noticed a white SUV slowly rolling through the neighborhood, stopping near my mailbox. Animal control. I walked over, casually nodding as the officer stepped out with a clipboard. He was young, polite, and already looked like he regretted his assignment. He told me there had been a complaint about aggressive wasps endangering the community, and asked if he could take a look at my shed. I agreed without hesitation, walked him over, and explained that I had recently set up a controlled pollinator zone after consulting with a licensed relocation expert. He took one look at the signs, the safety barriers I'd installed, and the sealed perimeter, and nodded in approval. The best part? There wasn't a single wasp in sight now, just a few stragglers buzzing near a vent, minding their business. It wasn't an uncontrolled infestation. It was a registered relocation habitat, fully within code. Karen must have expected a dramatic shutdown. Instead, the officer gave me a thumbs up and left. But I knew this wasn't her last move. That night I checked the HOA portal and, as predicted, a new emergency meeting was scheduled for the next evening. The topic listed? Unauthorized wildlife hazards and malicious property modifications. I almost laughed. She had flipped the script exactly as expected. She was going to try and pin this on me as some kind of eco-terrorist stunt, and she was going to do it in front of the board she once controlled with an iron fist. What she didn't know was that I had already started assembling a counterattack. I gathered the footage from my security system, clips of Karen trespassing, entering the shed, installing the Wi-Fi extender, and, of course, her panicked retreat after triggering the wasp. I edited nothing, just the raw footage with timestamp. I also printed screenshots of the extender's signal data, complete with MAC address mapping and router identifiers, thanks to Tyler's scans. On top of that, I brought statements from two other neighbors, Mrs. Delgado and the Callahans, both of whom had discovered extenders near their homes and verified that their networks had been breached. It wasn't just my revenge at stake anymore. Karen had made enemies across the entire block. When the meeting began the next evening at the HOA clubhouse, it was already tense. Usually half the chairs stayed empty during these things, but tonight the room was packed. Word had spread. Karen walked in wearing a neck brace and a large wrap on her wrist, like she had just escaped a bear attack instead of a garden shed. She had bandages on her fingers and a stack of papers in her arm. She even brought her cousin Brenda, another board member, to try and swing votes in her favor. As soon as the meeting was called to order, Karen jumped straight into her speech, declaring that my shed was a danger to the neighborhood, that I had knowingly unleashed wild insects as a weapon, and that my behavior violated the HOA's safety bylaws. She held up a blurry photo of the shed from 20 feet away, circled something that could have been a shadow or a leaf, and claimed it was a wasp swarm. Her voice trembled, and for a moment, I saw a few heads in the room nodding. But I stayed silent. I waited until she was done, until her voice cracked with exaggerated emotion, and then I stood. Without raising my tone, I handed a USB to the HOA chair and asked them to play the video I had submitted. The room went quiet as the screen lit up. There was Karen, pushing open my gate, looking around, slipping into my shed. Then a fast forward to 2 nights ago, her again, in the dark, opening the shed, and seconds later, the unforgettable moment when she burst back out, screaming like she'd seen a ghost. People laughed. Some gasped. The audio made it clear she wasn't lured or trapped. She trespassed, uninvited, for the second time, and walked straight into the consequences of her own actions. Then I followed up with the technical data. I passed out copies to the board members, showing the signal traces, the locations of the extenders, and the bandwidth theft she had committed not only against me but against multiple households. Jenna, my cousin and a cybersecurity analyst, had helped format the report, giving it full legitimacy. When I mentioned her credentials and the fact that several neighbors had signed affidavits, the mood shifted completely. The board began whispering among themselves. Karen tried to interrupt, saying I must have forged everything or set her up, but her voice sounded thinner now, weaker, desperate. Then Mrs. Delgado stood and addressed the room. She described how her medical consultations had been disrupted, how she'd lost a patient call due to bandwidth throttling, and how discovering Karen's network piggybacking on her signal had infuriated her. Her voice was calm but powerful. The Callahans followed, saying they'd seen Karen near their backyard the same week their streaming devices had started acting up. With each statement, Karen's credibility crumbled. Even her cousin looked uncomfortable now, silently shifting in her seat, probably realizing this was going to end badly. The final blow came when the HOA chair announced that they would be conducting a formal investigation into unauthorized equipment placement, and that until further notice, Karen was suspended from her duties as HOA president. The room erupted in murmurs. Karen shot to her feet and shouted that this was all a setup, a smear campaign, and that the real danger was how people like Mason think they can outsmart the system. But nobody cared anymore. The meeting adjourned. The board thanked me for presenting evidence so thoroughly. As people left the room, several neighbors patted me on the back or gave me a quiet thumbs up. Outside the clubhouse, I stood by my truck and watched as Karen stormed into her car, slamming the door and revving the engine like she was trying to blow off steam through the exhaust. Her SUV screeched out of the parking lot, leaving behind a trail of humiliation and broken pride. She hadn't been arrested. She hadn't been fined yet. But her reign of petty dictatorship was cracking. And I wasn't done. The sting had just begun, and the real consequences were still coming. Karen didn't show her face for 3 days after the HOA meeting, and during that time, the entire neighborhood seemed to breathe easier. The usual barrage of compliance emails and rule reminders had vanished. No one was measuring grass height or checking window blinds for uniformity. Kids played louder, people parked an extra inch over the curb without panicking, and it felt like the neighborhood had shaken off a heavy cloak. But I knew Karen wasn't done. People like her never simply give up. They retreat, reload, and return more delusional than ever. Sure enough, on the 4th morning, a new post appeared on the HOA online portal from Karen herself, titled "The Real Danger Among Us." It was a full-page rant accusing me of engineering cyber-sabotage, using wildlife as bioweapons, and violating HOA bylaws with malicious technology. She attached pictures of her bandaged hand and claimed she now suffered from wasp-induced trauma disorder. She demanded an emergency session be held to review my behavior, and she even uploaded a shaky phone video of her crying near the shed, clearly staged and overdramatic. What Karen didn't realize was that her post was so over the top, it backfired instantly. Comments flooded in. Some neighbors mocked her grammar, others asked if she was okay, and more than a few pointed out that she had literally trespassed twice and installed illegal equipment. Still, she pushed for another meeting. But this time, I was ready with something she couldn't erase: a full technical audit of her entire rogue Wi-Fi setup. I had contacted my cousin Jenna again, the cybersecurity analyst, and she had gone deeper than before. Not only had she traced the signal strength and equipment origin, but she also found logs from the extender's default admin panels. And in those logs, guess what we discovered? One of the extenders had automatically logged into her laptop's device ID at 2:13 a.m. 3 nights before the incident, right from inside my shed. We had digital fingerprints, concrete evidence tying the device to her own electronic. It was the final nail. I emailed the full report to the HOA board and attached a simple note: if she wants another meeting, let's do it with everything on the table. Surprisingly, they agreed, scheduling a session not at the usual clubhouse but at the community rec center, where more residents could attend. They expected a crowd. Word had spread far beyond our cul-de-sac. People from surrounding blocks were asking questions about the Wi-Fi lady and the Wasp guy. I couldn't walk down the sidewalk without someone making buzzing noises and grinning. For once, I didn't mind being the center of attention. The night of the meeting, I arrived early and took a seat in the front row, holding a printed copy of Jenna's report in my lap. Karen showed up late, dramatically as always, wearing sunglasses indoors and a silk scarf wrapped around her neck like she'd just survived a war zone. She handed out photocopies of her statement to board members and then took center stage like she was auditioning for a role. She launched into a monologue about mental distress, emotional damage, and her deep concern for the safety of the community. She claimed I had orchestrated an elaborate trap to target her, and that my use of controlled nature zones amounted to environmental terrorism. She even suggested the board bring in legal counsel to pursue damages against me. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then the HOA chair nodded toward me and said, "Mason, would you like to respond?" I stood, walked to the table, and handed out my report. Then I plugged in a USB stick to the projector and began a short, clear presentation. I started with her unauthorized entry, played the security footage again, showed the extender she had installed, the MAC addresses, and the Wi-Fi map. Then I switched to Jenna's digital log, where her own laptop had auto-connected to the shed extender. The timestamps matched the night she was caught on video. The final slide? A screenshot of a message Karen had sent via HOA internal chat 2 weeks earlier saying, "If everyone just used one system, we wouldn't have to deal with slow speeds. I'm just solving a problem." The silence was electric. Karen looked pale. A few people gasped. Then the HOA secretary cleared his throat and asked, "So, just to confirm, you entered Mason's shed, installed equipment, accessed his signal, and lied about it?" Karen mumbled something about being framed. The board chair shook his head. "Karen, you've been caught trespassing, stealing services, and now you're slandering a resident who handled this more calmly than most of us would. You are hereby removed as HOA president effective immediately." The room erupted in applause. Someone clapped so hard they knocked over a folding chair. Karen stood frozen for a moment, then grabbed her stack of papers, tore them in half, and stormed out without another word. As she passed me, she hissed, "You'll regret this." I smiled and said, "Only if I lose signal again." That got a laugh from the back row. As the meeting wrapped up, I stayed behind to thank the board members, and that's when Tyler leaned over and whispered, "You know, we should really throw a party now. A real one. With Wi-Fi for everyone, except her." The next week, things changed fast. Tyler was nominated as interim president, and one of the first things he did was draft new rules for HOA tech boundaries. Any installation of shared network hardware now required consent from all impacted households. Unauthorized extenders would be removed and fined. Karen, now stripped of her authority, was sent a formal notice to remove any remaining rogue devices within 72 hours, or the HOA would file a civil complaint. 2 days later, her husband could be seen yanking equipment out of the birdhouse and garden gnome. No one helped. Meanwhile, I decided to give something back to the neighborhood. With Jenna's help, I set up a free workshop on cybersecurity basics. We hosted it in the clubhouse, packed with curious neighbors who were suddenly very interested in their Wi-Fi safety. I taught them about password protection, router admin settings, and how to check for piggybackers. At the end of the session, I gave away free signal shields. Simple tin-lined pouches that prevented outside access. Everyone loved it. A week later, the community installed a proper, centralized Wi-Fi tower near the clubhouse, one designed and donated by a tech company Jenna worked with. It offered free service for all residents during HOA events and was firewalled to prevent individual abuse. It was a symbol of progress. It was also a giant middle finger to Karen's scheme. As for the shed, it returned to its peaceful purpose. The wasps eventually migrated away once the food source dried up, and Mark helped me safely seal their habitat. I replaced the interior insulation, gave it a fresh coat of paint, and added a small wooden plaque above the door that read, "Private Property. Beware of Buzz." Tyler laughed so hard when he saw it that he nearly dropped his coffee. Karen never apologized. She never acknowledged what she did. But she disappeared from public life. Her house went up for sale 2 months later, and when the moving truck came, no one waved goodbye. No one helped load a single box. She left just like she had ruled, alone, bitter, and angry that people had stopped being afraid of her clipboard. And me? I finally had peace, bandwidth, and my shed back. The sun rose over the neighborhood with a kind of quiet stillness that felt earned, like everyone collectively knew a storm had passed and life was returning to normal. There were no passive-aggressive flyers taped to front doors, no angry notes about weeds or mailbox tilt, no patrolling figure with a clipboard scrutinizing the angle of patio chairs. Karen was gone. Her house sat at the corner of the street, dark and hollow, the "for sale" sign gone and replaced with one that read, "Under new management." I didn't know the buyers, but I hoped they were normal. The neighborhood had had enough drama for a decade, and I wasn't eager to go through another HOA dictatorship, especially not one that involved stolen Wi-Fi and insect retaliation. But the truth was, even though she was out of sight, Karen had left an imprint on everyone. We had all learned something about boundaries, privacy, and how far someone would go to assert control over things that were never theirs. One morning, about 2 weeks after her departure, I walked out to the shed, now back to its peaceful, quiet self. I had cleaned it thoroughly, resealed the insulation, and added some better lighting. It had become my workshop again, a place to tinker, relax, and disappear from the world for a few hours. The faint memory of her shrieking from inside still echoed when I opened the door, and I couldn't help but smirk each time I stepped inside. The little wooden plaque above the entrance remained, "Private Property, Beware of Buzz." It wasn't just a joke anymore. It was a reminder of everything that had happened and how sometimes the best revenge doesn't require shouting, but patience, planning, and a few hundred airborne allies. Inside the shed, I unpacked the tools I had put away during the chaos. My drill, my soldering kit, even the old ham radio I had been meaning to refurbish. As I set everything back in place, I noticed the Wi-Fi extender Karen had installed. I had kept it all this time, not because I wanted to reuse it, but because it was part of the story now. Like a trophy, or maybe evidence in a case that had already closed itself. I placed it on a shelf labeled, "Do Not Touch," and decided to leave it there, a little monument to suburban overreach and poetic justice. Things in the neighborhood had improved. With Karen out of the way, Tyler took the role of HOA president seriously but with compassion. He didn't issue warnings. He had conversations. He asked for volunteers instead of issuing command. He even created a suggestion box that he actually read. And every week, the HOA website posted updates that weren't filled with threats or veiled insults but actual useful information. People showed up to meetings now not because they were afraid of fines, but because they were curious about improvement. The tennis court got new lights. The dog park was finally cleaned up. Even the community garden started producing vegetables again after Karen's obsession with aesthetic symmetry had killed off half the tomato plants last year. One of the most satisfying changes came when the HOA implemented a new policy about digital boundaries. No more unauthorized surveillance equipment. No more rogue signal boosting. Anyone caught installing tech on another person's property without written consent would face fines, community service, and even legal consequences. And it was named the Digital Privacy and Boundary Protection Act, affectionately dubbed by the neighbors as Karen's Law. It passed with a unanimous vote. I didn't ask for credit, but Tyler made sure everyone knew where it started. Sometimes it takes a shed full of wasps to remind us what privacy really means, he'd said at the meeting, and the room burst into laughter. Despite the newfound peace, I stayed cautious. I had added another outdoor camera, installed a motion sensor light near the back gate, and updated all my passwords. It wasn't paranoia. It was awareness. Karen had reminded me that people will always try to take what they think they deserve. And sometimes those people wear nice shoes and smile while doing it. But she also reminded me that standing up doesn't always mean shouting louder. It means being smarter, being patient, and letting the truth reveal itself in the most undeniable ways. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It had no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Slanted, aggressive, and all capital letters. It was from Karen. The note was brief. Just a single sheet of paper with 4 words scrawled in red ink. Enjoy your little shed. There was no signature, no threats, nothing more. I held the letter for a moment and then laughed. That was it. That was all she had left. A note that felt more like a weak jab than a warning. I scanned it just in case, then tossed it into the fire pit behind the shed. I wasn't worried. If anything, it confirmed she had lost, and she knew it. The next Saturday, I hosted a barbecue. Not a protest, not a celebration, just a regular, laid-back, no HOA permit required barbecue. Tyler brought burgers. Mrs. Delgado brought her famous cornbread. Jenna stopped by and set up a small station showing neighbors how to check their network traffic. The kids played tag, someone set up a speaker with old rock music, and for the first time in a long while, everyone just relaxed. There were no clipboard check-ins, no condescending warnings. Just people being people. And in the middle of it all stood my shed, its door wide open, tools gleaming, completely ordinary and unthreatening, unless, of course, you happened to know its history. As the sun dipped and the sky turned golden, I stood next to the grill and looked around. It hit me then that revenge wasn't about retaliation. It was about restoration. About reclaiming something someone tried to take away. My privacy. My dignity. My space. Karen had tried to make everyone live by her rulebook, rewriting pages to suit her whims. But all it took was a shed, a swarm, and a little help from friends to show her that no amount of fake authority could stand up to truth and community. Later that night, as I sat on the porch watching the last of the guests leave, Tyler joined me with a soda in hand and chuckled. You know, if we ever write a book about this place, Chapter 1 better start with "It began with a stolen signal." I grinned and raised my glass. And it ended with the buzz heard around the block. We laughed. The stars came out, and for the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't feel threatening. It felt like home again.